June 10th, 1944. Near Formigny, Normandy. The rain hadn't stopped since nightfall. Mist hung thick above the hedgerows, swallowing sound, cloaking movement, and soaking every inch of Lieutenant Jack Sanford's fatigues until they clung to his back like ice-wet bandages. He was 32, an engineer by training, but out here in the Norman bocage, that meant crawling through mud, wiring charges, and praying the Germans didn't see him first. His face was caked in soil. Sweat stung his eyes. Every breath smelled of crushed grass and gun oil. He lay pressed into a shallow ditch, no more than 30 yards from the pillbox that had killed 6 men this morning and another 5 in the afternoon. Somewhere inside it, a belt-fed MG-42 waited, its barrel likely red-hot from hours of fire. The pillbox had no windows, only slits. Its concrete was 3 feet thick. The walls shrugged off mortars like pebbles. American shells had cratered the trees, but left the bunker untouched. Behind Sanford, 24 infantrymen clung to the ground in total silence. The enemy had already bracketed their position. A single misstep would bring down another burst. Shattered bark, scorched leaves, twitching corpses. There was nothing romantic about this. The advance had stopped cold. No one was moving. Sanford's fingers trembled as he unslung the canvas-wrapped cylinder from his back. It looked like a length of stovepipe, dented and blackened at the ends, barely 1.5 feet long. Taped along one side was a hand-rolled fuse, coiled like a viper. The device had no serial number, no manual, no name. It wasn't supposed to exist. He had built it himself. Its interior was filled with a slurry of diesel-thinned composition C, a pinch of powdered aluminum, and a steel cone scavenged from a destroyed Panther's exhaust vent. Shaped charges weren't new, but this one was unstable, volatile, and banned. Officially, it was classified as operationally hazardous. One general had called it suicidal. Sanford called it the only thing that might work. The charge had already killed 1 man during testing. Another had lost his hand. But that was back on the beach, behind a barn far from this hellhole. Here, in the bocage, rules bent with every step. Bureaucracy didn't bleed. Men did. He bit the tip of the fuse and spat the cap into the mud. Every motion felt heavy. The charge was slick with water and grime. He slid the timer into place. 10 seconds, no more. Just enough to retreat and hope. If he hesitated now, they'd die here by morning. Crawling through thorny undergrowth, he felt each inch tear at his sleeves. The ground was soft but uneven, riddled with roots and broken equipment. Spent casings crunched under his knee. A German flare arced above the treetops, casting a sickly green light over the scene. He froze. Nothing moved. The forest held its breath. Then the flare hissed out. Shadows returned. He reached the edge of the crater where 2 GIs had been shredded by shrapnel hours before. Their helmets still lay there, one upside down, half filled with water. Using the crater's rim as cover, he slid the charge forward, pressing it against the pillbox's firing port. It fit snug. A good seal meant better focus. He lit the fuse with a match and didn't watch it burn. He turned and ran, boots slipping, lungs tight, knowing he had less than 10 seconds to live or die. The explosion was like nothing he'd heard before. Not a boom, but a thump so deep it seemed to come from the earth itself. Then came the blast wave, hot, dry, and crushing, followed by a vacuum that sucked the breath from his chest. Then, silence. No return fire. No screaming. No gunner barking orders in clipped German. Just a low hiss from the trees and the distant rumble of an unseen tank somewhere east. Sanford rose slowly, ears ringing. Smoke coiled from the pillbox's seam like steam from a broken pipe. The firing slit was gone. In its place, a gaping hole poured gray fumes into the hedgerow like breath from a dying beast. He gestured. 2 riflemen sprinted forward, ducking low, climbing into the breach. A third followed with a flashlight. No shots were fired. 5 minutes passed. Then the sergeant emerged, face pale, voice low. "It's done," he muttered. "All of them. Cooked inside." Sanford didn't speak. He just nodded and sat down hard on the cold, wet ground. The rain started again, light at first, then steady. It mingled with the stench of burned flesh and fuel. In the distance, another gun barked. The line would move forward now, but not because of any order from high command, because of something he wasn't allowed to use, because of a charge they said was too dangerous to exist, because he didn't care anymore about what was allowed and what wasn't. The battle for Normandy didn't unfold across open plains. It bled through 1,000 narrow corridors of hedge and stone. Ancient farmers had carved the bocage centuries ago, and now every root, ridge, and ditch worked for the Germans. Tall earthen embankments, topped with tangled brush, turned each field into a fortress. Tanks couldn't see. Artillery was blind. Infantry stepped into ambushes without ever spotting the enemy. It wasn't a front. It was a trap. 4 days after D-Day, American lines had barely moved inland. The cost was staggering. Over 12,000 men killed, wounded, or missing. In sectors west of Omaha Beach, progress slowed to a crawl. Every 100 yards demanded another sacrifice. Engineers couldn't keep up. Their standard breaching charges were designed for doors, not reinforced German bunkers poured from steel-reinforced concrete and buried under 3 feet of earth. The Germans knew this ground. They'd trained for years to make it lethal. Machine guns were positioned to crisscross every approach. Mortars zeroed in on likely rally points. Snipers picked off officers with chilling precision. The smell of cordite and decay hung heavy in the trees. Leaves dripped with blood and rainwater. Nobody ate hot meals anymore. The dead weren't retrieved. They were left where they fell, eyes open, fingers stiffening around shattered rifles. Inside the bunkers, the defenders didn't need to move. They had air vents, reinforced firing ports, and interlocking corridors designed to survive shelling. American flamethrowers couldn't reach their targets. Rifle grenades bounced off concrete. Satchel charges required suicidal proximity. Platoons would disappear into the hedgerows and return in pieces, or not at all. Frustration turned into desperation. Behind the lines, arguments erupted daily. Ordnance officers refused to issue experimental weapons without proper testing. Engineers demanded solutions that didn't exist. Doctrines written in clean offices in Washington collapsed on contact with Normandy mud. Nothing was fast enough, strong enough, or safe enough to stop what was coming. The front didn't bend. It broke men instead. Lieutenant Sanford had known this was coming. Back in Tunisia, he'd seen what the Germans could build. He'd studied the bunkers at Mareth and Defied. He'd watched engineers try to crack fortifications using dynamite sticks packed into canvas sacks, primitive, unreliable, and barely effective. When he returned to England in early 1944, he began sketching alternatives in secret. He'd found old munitions manuals, chemistry texts, even civilian demolition blueprints. None offered what they needed. His proposal, filed through unofficial channels, outlined a shaped charge that used a volatile slurry mixture capable of cutting through steel-reinforced concrete in seconds. The idea was sound. The physics were proven. The danger was real. Every officer who reviewed it flagged it as too unstable. The fuel mixture burned too hot. The blast radius couldn't be controlled. If used wrong, it could kill the entire squad deploying it. The rejection came with a warning. Any further experimentation without direct supervision will result in disciplinary action under Article 89. Sanford signed the paper, nodded politely, then walked back to the tent where his prototypes were hidden under spare tarps and ration crates. Orders didn't matter to the men who would die screaming in the mud. Doctrine didn't stop a pillbox from turning a machine gun into a god. By the time his unit landed on Utah Beach, the fuse was already lit, metaphorically and literally. They pushed forward fast, then hit the wall. Bunkers, pillboxes, interlocked MG nests, whole towns reinforced from basement to rooftop. Carentan, Sainte-Mère-Église, Montebourg, each name etched deeper into Sanford's brain, each one another wound that wouldn't close. The army had flamethrowers, barely. They were bulky, prone to leaking, and put their operators at the front of the line with giant targets strapped to their backs. The official satchel charges carried enough power to crack walls, but only with perfect placement. Most men died before getting close. And artillery? Too slow. Too imprecise. The enemy knew how to shelter. Only infantry could finish the job. And they were dying by the dozen to do it. Reports filtered in. Entire companies pinned down by a single bunker. Casualty rates above 50%. Engineers resorting to jury-rigged solutions. Fuel canisters, phosphorus grenades, even welding torches. Nothing worked for long. Each failed attempt left another crater filled with shredded uniforms and smoking bones. Sanford watched it all. He wrote every location down, drew sketches of every bunker variant they encountered. He studied angles, impact points, thermal stress marks. No one else had time to care, but he wasn't trying to write a report. He was building something no one asked for, but everyone would need. He stopped asking for approval. He stopped waiting for authorization. He began testing. In a field behind the drop zone at Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, he buried 2 barrels and blew them in sequence, one with TNT, one with his new mixture. The difference wasn't subtle. One left a dent. The other created a cavity the size of a jeep. The air afterward smelled of melted copper and scorched soil. Even birds stopped chirping. Still, he didn't trust it. The mixture changed with temperature. The pressure cone had to be perfect. A single flaw, and it would blow sideways. He tested again, then again. When shrapnel tore through the wall of a nearby barn, he stopped. But he didn't abandon it. He improved it. By June 9th, the decision made itself. Every tool they had was failing. Bunkers were chewing through men faster than replacements could arrive. A breakthrough wasn't coming unless someone forced one. Sanford's invention, buried under threats and red tape, was the only weapon left untried, and it was waiting in his pack, wrapped in a blanket, half-wired, fully illegal. All it needed was a target. Sanford's idea didn't strike like lightning. It crept in slowly, forming across months of frustration, observation, and the constant thrum of danger that followed engineers everywhere. The spark had first lit in North Africa, where he'd watched British sappers improvise demolition charges from fuel drums and scavenged explosives. Those makeshift bombs punched through Italian fortifications that standard charges barely scratched. The memory clung to him. The smell of burning diesel, the sudden rupture of concrete, the eerie quiet that followed each blast. In England, preparing for the invasion, he studied captured German armor. He examined damaged Panthers in muddy storage yards, tracing scorch marks and blast cavities with gloved fingers. One wreck had a cone-shaped rupture near the exhaust vent, a shaped charge hit. The geometry fascinated him. A perfect angle produced unimaginable force. That principle was simple. The challenge was building something small enough to carry and powerful enough to shatter a bunker. He found his answer in scraps. Damaged aircraft parts, rejected blasting caps, leftover aluminum powder from an abandoned incendiary project. He mixed them in different ratios, keeping notes in a pocket notebook already stained with grease. His first prototype melted its casing. The second blew a crater into the testing pit, but nearly tore apart the sandbag wall shielding him. The third ignited prematurely, sending a fireball across a supply tent and burning the eyebrows off a corporal who had wandered too close. Men laughed, but Sanford didn't. He saw potential. He refined the mixture, smoothing the slurry into something manageable. The consistency felt like wet clay. It smelled sharp and metallic, with a hint of gasoline. When he packed it into a metal tube and fitted a conical insert cut from scavenged armor, he sensed he was finally shaping something real, something lethal, something terrifying. He christened it privately, the Hell Tube. But every improvement brought new danger. The compound reacted unpredictably in cold weather. A fuse that burned evenly one day might sputter the next. The casing dented easily. Any impact could deform the cone, weakening the blast. During official testing, one demonstration charge ruptured sideways, flinging shards of steel into the dirt 10 yards from a major's boots. That ended any hope of approval. Ordnance Command issued a formal memo. Experimental demolition devices of Lieutenant Sanford's design are unauthorized for field deployment. The language was stiff, sharp, and absolute. A second notice followed, an explicit warning that further experimentation could result in court-martial. Both papers were signed, stamped, and delivered by officers who never once stepped into a bunker under fire. Sanford accepted the reprimands with a quiet nod. He folded the documents and tucked them into his pack beside the prototype itself. Nothing ended. If anything, the warnings fueled him. The rejection confirmed what he already understood. This weapon frightened the men who read about it but hadn't seen what a German bunker could do to a platoon pinned in a field. When his unit reached Normandy, he saw the exact scenario he had feared. Engineers carrying standard charges died before reaching their targets. Flamethrower tanks bogged down in the mud. Even shaped charges from official kits struggled against deeply dug-in fortifications. Every failure tightened the knot in his chest. On June 8th, he watched a squad advance toward a nest near Sainte-Mère-Église. The first man fell instantly. The next two collapsed in the mud before they crossed the ditch. Survivors crawled back shaking and bloodied, whispering about a gun firing from a perfectly sealed bunker. That night, Sanford sat beside a shattered stone wall, rolling his prototype between his palms. The metal felt slick from rain. Every dent, scratch, and scorch mark told the story of his desperation. Fear crept in. Not fear of the device, but fear of using it in full view of others. If it failed, he'd be blamed. If it worked, he'd still be punished. No outcome protected him. But men were dying. The line was collapsing. Orders didn't matter anymore. Another barrage lit the horizon with flashes of orange, each burst echoing through the hedgerows. The ground trembled. Leaves fluttered down like ash. The noise shook something loose in him. The decision formed not with certainty but with grim inevitability. He could no longer stand by and watch. The next morning he approached Sergeant Harlan, who had lost 2 brothers in Italy. The man understood the grim math of survival. When Sanford revealed the canister wrapped in a tarp, Harlan didn't ask for permission slips or signatures. He simply stared at it, eyes narrowing, hands trembling slightly. "Will it work?" he murmured. Sanford didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them felt like a pact. By dawn on June 10th, the Hell Tube was strapped to Sanford's back. Unauthorized, unapproved, unforgiven. But it was ready. And the first target waited less than a mile away. The approach to the target was nothing but mud, wire, and silence broken by random bursts of machine gun fire. Dawn refused to break. Thick clouds pressed low, casting everything in a dull green-gray haze. Damp grass bent underfoot. Tree trunks bled sap from shell wounds. The hedgerows groaned in the wind like dying animals. Lieutenant Sanford moved with his shoulders hunched and every nerve drawn tight. He carried death on his back, untested, unpredictable, and entirely his. The bunker ahead had chewed through 3 assaults in 24 hours. Concrete thick as a vault, iron firing ports, and a forward line of wire entanglements meant to catch ankles and buy seconds. Those seconds killed. The Germans inside didn't shout. They didn't panic. They just waited. Every approach had already been zeroed. Infantrymen were buried in shallow graves behind the tree line, some with boots still laced, others missing faces. Sanford crouched with Sergeant Harlan behind a jagged stump. The air smelled of stagnant water, oil, and something acrid, maybe singed wool or rotted flesh. Every time a branch cracked, Harlan flinched. No one had eaten. No one could. The silence didn't comfort. It warned. Sanford unrolled the tube and slid the charge from its wrapping. The metal gleamed dully in the low light, dented from transport, blackened at the base from previous tests. He adjusted the fuse with shaking fingers. Moisture had already seeped into the cord. One misfire, and the entire team would vanish in a smear. The timer was crude. A match-lit delay soaked in wax, meant to burn for 10 seconds. Sometimes it burned faster. They crept forward, pressed low to the soil, crawling through grass slick with dew and blood. No birds sang. Insects chirped once, then stopped. Every inch crawled raised the pulse. The bunker loomed larger with each heartbeat, its angular face jutting from the ground like a buried beast's jaw. A faint haze of smoke curled from its firing slit, evidence of recent fire. 10 yards. 5. Sanford pressed the charge against the concrete, directly beneath the narrow firing port. It fit snug. Perfect contact meant maximum focus. He struck the match, sparked the fuse, and turned without looking. No pause, no hesitation, just movement. He dove back behind the stump. The blast didn't roar, it slammed. A sudden, concussive pressure wave punched the trees flat and vacuumed the air clean. A deep thump echoed through the ground, like the heartbeat of something immense. Then came the high whine of cracking stone, a metallic groan, and the scream of shearing rebar. Smoke poured from the hole, thick, oily, and black. Inside, something had caught fire. The sound of ammo cooking off followed, a stuttering series of dry pops. Then, silence. No answering gunfire, no shouts in German, just the low hiss of scorched air escaping the wreck. Sanford didn't move. His ears rang. Blood trickled from one nostril. He stared ahead, frozen, until Harlan nudged him with a trembling elbow. "It's open," he muttered. "That bastard thing opened it." 2 riflemen rushed in, weapons raised. The bunker slit was gone, replaced by a jagged cavity. They disappeared inside. The rest of the unit waited, weapons trained, breath held. Every second stretched. Then came a voice from within. "Clear!" Sanford stood, his knees buckled. He forced himself forward, past twisted roots and craters, toward the smoke-choked entrance. Inside, the walls were blackened. Concrete had vaporized into powder. The firing slit had collapsed inward. German bodies lay where they'd stood, burned, unrecognizable, their weapons still slung. The blast hadn't just killed. It had incinerated. Nothing moved. No wounded. No survivors. Just silence and heat and a strange metallic scent that clung to the nostrils. Word spread instantly. The hell tube wasn't theory anymore. It worked. More than that. It shattered what couldn't be touched before. It didn't just breach bunkers. It annihilated them. By nightfall, 5 more tubes had been requested. Engineers passed instructions hand to hand. No one asked where they came from. No one cared. Regulations lost their teeth when steel walls finally cracked. Sanford didn't celebrate. He sat beside the crater, hands black with soot, and stared into the hole he'd made. Smoke still drifted up, curling through the trees like a spirit. The stench of cooked flesh lingered. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. But something in the war had changed. One man's heresy had become the infantry's salvation, and the next bunker was already waiting. By June 11th, the hell tube wasn't a secret anymore. It moved through the front lines like contraband, passed between squads in canvas bags, transported under blankets, handed off with hushed instructions. No paperwork, no serial numbers. No one cared who built it. All that mattered was that it worked. In the orchards south of Carentan, a team used one to vaporize a double-walled machine gun nest dug beneath a collapsed barn. In Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, another squad slid one through a drainage pipe and blew a tunnel straight into a command bunker. Each use turned whispers into obsession. Men who'd never believed in engineers before now begged for Sanford's strange, blackened cylinders. He couldn't keep up. Working out of an abandoned French chicken coop behind the lines, he melted, poured, and packed through the night. Oil drums became mixers. Mess tins were reshaped into cones. A captured German forge provided just enough heat to mold steel casings. It smelled of burning hair, grease, and old feathers. His fingers bled from steel splinters. He didn't sleep. They improvised faster than the system could react. Infantrymen bolted carrying handles onto the tubes. Some mounted them on sleds, dragging them through hedgerows like hunting dogs. A few attached bicycle tires to wooden frames, turning the charges into rolling bombs. Nothing was uniform. Every charge looked different. But every one exploded with the same violent, air-crushing roar. Word of the device reached Divisional HQ within 2 days. Sanford was summoned but ignored the order. He had no time for meetings. More requests came in every hour. In one case, a sergeant from the 506th dropped off a blood-stained note reading only, "3 more, for God's sake." Attached was a German Iron Cross, offered as payment. Command's first reaction was fury. Ordnance officers stormed his makeshift lab, demanding documentation, regulation compliance, and immediate cessation. Sanford didn't argue. He pointed to a wall where helmets had been nailed, each from a soldier killed before the charges arrived. They didn't stay long after that. Production scaled up, but only by theft and desperation. Mechanics retooled tank repair shops to cut steel tubes. Artillerymen donated fuse timers from dud shells. Aviators dropped crates of flammable gel meant for flamethrowers. Some supplies were requisitioned legally, most weren't. Within 72 hours, over 20 hell tubes had been deployed across multiple divisions. The results were brutal. In just 3 days, 74 bunkers fell. Some collapsed inward, their garrisons crushed under concrete. Others burst open like rotted fruit, flames licking through rifle slits as defenders tried to flee. In one instance near Saint-Lô, the explosion ruptured an underground ammo cache, leveling 2 houses above it. Morale shifted. Infantrymen, once terrified of pillboxes, now advanced with purpose. They moved faster, struck harder. Reports described attackers grinning as they hauled their strange new weapons forward, calling them bunker busters, storm sticks, and cobra's teeth. But Sanford stuck with the name he'd first whispered to himself in Tunisia: Hell Tube. It wasn't poetic, it was accurate. Not everyone approved. A colonel in Carentan ordered Sanford detained for violating explosives protocol. That same day, the colonel's headquarters came under fire from a recessed German strongpoint. 2 of Sanford's charges were used to silence it. The colonel tore up the arrest warrant and ordered 5 more devices delivered by nightfall. With every success, the tension tightened. The line between necessity and madness thinned. Some charges misfired. One detonated too early, killing 2 riflemen and blowing a crater where a jeep had been parked seconds earlier. The explosion scorched a tree line black. No one mentioned it. There wasn't time. Sanford's body deteriorated, hands blistered, eyes bloodshot. His voice rasped from smoke inhalation, but he worked. Bent over crates, arms shaking, sweat pouring through his shirt, he kept building. Every failure made him adjust. Every report sharpened the formula. He wrote nothing down. Every measurement lived in his head. Command began shifting doctrine. Engineers trained on the new device unofficially. Orders mentioned field-adapted breaching tools. No names, no inventor, no source. Just results. The weapon had crossed the line, from forbidden to indispensable, and the biggest fortress still held. Waiting. June 14th, 1944. Maisie Battery, Normandy. It was never marked on Allied maps properly. Hidden in the hedgerows between Grand Camp and Isigny, the Maisie Battery was a fortress carved into the soil. Trenches curved like veins through the earth. Bunkers linked by underground passageways, mortars tucked into forest shadows. Artillery positioned beneath layers of camouflage netting, shielded by concrete so thick even naval shells failed to crack them. The site had survived air raids, bombardments, and 2 armored probes. Now, it was stopping the 4th Division cold. No one could approach without dying. Fields were rigged with mines. Entry points swept by overlapping MG-42s. Forward scouts vanished. Wounded screamed for hours before silence claimed them. The ground stank of wet hay, oil, and cordite. Smoke clung low like fog. Even the birds avoided the sky. At 0400, Sanford received the order. Breach the Maisie Battery. No backup, no delay. Take your charges and go. He loaded 9 held tubes onto a modified farm cart, reinforced with steel scraps and rubber tires peeled from wrecked jeeps. Harlan and 4 engineers joined him. Their boots sank in mud up to the ankles. Every step forward felt like walking into something ancient and buried. Shelling lit the horizon in brief flashes. Trees split from the pressure. Wind carried the sharp scent of ozone and scorched pine. The sky never fully brightened, just a dull, suffocating gray. Sanford's coat was soaked before they reached the first trench. Rain had returned, steady, cold, relentless. One charge was lost early. It slipped from the cart and cracked open on a jagged stone. The mixture fizzled, leaked, then ignited in a quiet puff. The blast tore a hole in the trail and sent one man flying. His body hit the ground limp, face down in water. No time to grieve. They moved faster. They reached the outer trench as daylight thinned. The Germans saw them too late. A burst of rifle fire cut overhead, ripping bark from trees. Sanford dropped, rolled, and crawled toward the nearest bunker door, low, reinforced, built into a hillside. Harlan followed, dragging one charge across gravel. The fuse refused to light. Sanford struck the match again. Wind snuffed it. He tore the striker across a stone, shielded it with his body, and touched flame to the cord. 10 seconds. They ducked. The explosion buckled the entire hillside. Soil lifted into the air in a thick plume. The iron door didn't just blast open, it vaporized. Inside, flames danced along shattered walls. Ammunition cooked off like popcorn. They entered through smoke. 2 defenders tried to flee. One was already burned, dragging half a leg. The other collapsed from concussive force. The squad cleared the bunker room by room. Hallways glowed orange from residual heat. Sweat stung eyes. Walls trembled from secondary explosions deeper inside. 3 more charges went into vent shafts. 2 more were slid down access tunnels. The last was buried under the main gun turret. Every detonation came with a different sound, some deep and low like a falling building, others sharp, echoing down corridors like thunder in a steel drum. By midnight, the entire battery was silent. Flames flickered in the trees. Concrete slabs leaned at odd angles. Earth had cracked wide where the main magazine exploded. Harlan sat down near the crater, face blank, hands burned red. 2 engineers wept quietly under a collapsed trench roof. No German survivors emerged. Some had likely suffocated in sealed bunkers. Others died instantly from overpressure. One was found curled near a radio, clutching a photograph burned at the corners. Sanford didn't speak. He walked the perimeter twice, boots crunching through ash and wet gravel. His hands shook. His eyes were glassy. He dropped to one knee, not in prayer but exhaustion. The Maisie battery had fallen without infantry assault. 9 devices did what weeks of shelling couldn't. No Americans died in the final breach. By dawn, the smoke rose like steam over scorched earth. The battery was done. The breakthrough was open. The road to Cherbourg lay beyond the ridge. But something had changed. Sanford couldn't feel triumph, just heat in his palms, and the realization that he had become the very weapon he built. June 15th, 1944. Carentan Sector, Normandy. The ruins of Maisie still smoldered behind them, but the orders kept coming. No rest, no ceremony, no replacement gear. Just coordinates scribbled in charcoal and the phrase "breach immediately." Sanford's team pushed forward, hollow-eyed, blistered, their uniforms soaked through with blood and rain. Their hands were black with soot. Their boots tore through weeds grown thick with ash. Word of the charges had spread beyond the field. Regimental reports now listed unofficial bunker-clearing devices under success logs. Field commanders scrawled Sanford's name in margins, circled in red. He'd become an asset, a liability, and a ghost, depending on which colonel was reading the day's casualty chart. He didn't care, not anymore. New officers began arriving at his camp, bearing scraps, copper cones from destroyed anti-tank shells, nitroglycerin ampoules stolen from demolitions dumps, empty mortar tubes, all jammed into duffel bags. They came like pilgrims. Each whispered the same thing. "Can you make more?" Sanford didn't answer. He just took the parts. He no longer recorded measurements. His hands remembered what his mind had burned away. Pour, pack, seal, twist the fuse. There was no time to weigh. No room for precision, only repetition. His fingers trembled constantly now. The smell of the mixture clung to his clothes. He carried it in his lungs. On June 15th, General Barton's engineers formally adopted the weapon. It was renamed in the reports Bunker Breach Type K. The K stood for killed, though no one admitted it. It wasn't standardized. It couldn't be, but it was distributed in crates marked experimental assets, non-returnable. The Pentagon's paperwork called it Field-Specific Ordnance Innovation. No credit line, no citation. The man who invented it still worked from a crate beside a barn, mixing fuel with a broken bayonet as a stir rod. The tide of the war shifted. Infantry now moved faster through towns. Machine gun nests that had once stalled battalions fell in minutes. The Germans grew paranoid. Some bunkers were found abandoned. Others detonated prematurely, defenders too terrified to hold. Sanford's invention was rewriting doctrine one detonation at a time, but not without cost. The devices remained unstable. One premature fuse turned a hedgerow into a grave for 5 engineers. Another misfire vaporized half a platoon attempting to breach a culvert near Saint-Lô. A shell fragment embedded in the only unarmored fuel canister. Flames reached the charge. No one survived the ignition. He wrote their names on the inside wall of his shack. He had no chalk, just a knife. The scratches ran crooked, crude, almost invisible in the shadows. But he made sure not to forget. At night he sat alone, listening to the wind move through the trees like whispers of the dead. The forest creaked, floor slick with moss and residue. Each gust smelled faintly of fire and rotting wood. He didn't sleep. He didn't speak unless necessary. He only built. He refused a citation for bravery. He refused the promotion. He refused to appear at briefings. "I don't belong in a map room," he told one captain. "I belong behind the fire." After the breakthrough at Cherbourg, the High Command drafted a full report on battlefield engineering tactics. One section included a single-typed line: "Improvised bunker charges proved tactically decisive in post-D-Day progression." There were no names. Sanford didn't mind. His legacy wasn't meant for ceremonies. It was written in charred bunker walls, cratered cement, and the silence that followed every final blast. He had saved lives by burning holes in the earth, and he was still counting how many. The hell tube vanished after Normandy, but its scars didn't. The ground still remembered: craters filled with rainwater, concrete walls bent inward like torn parchment, rusted MGs left half-melted in twisted mounts. The war moved forward. The weapon stayed behind. Jack Sanford didn't celebrate victory. He didn't return to parades, reunions, or medals. He declined every interview. The Army offered a desk in Paris. He walked out of the tent before they finished the sentence. Instead, he packed his uniform into a crate, burned the last of his notes, and left without a forwarding address. The official report credited shaped charges. No mention of instability, no acknowledgement of the early ban, no record of the deaths during testing. The name Hell Tube didn't appear anywhere. But within the 1st Engineer Brigade, the men remembered. They whispered it like a curse or a prayer. In the months that followed, similar designs appeared in other theaters. Some arrived in Italy, others showed up near Metz. The mix changed: different fuel, different cones, but the principle remained. One man's desperation had become a battlefield doctrine. By 1945, the Office of Strategic Services began experimenting with portable shaped charge devices for sabotage teams. Many looked eerily familiar: short tubes, sealed caps, handmade cones. In one photo, a charge bore Sanford's initials scratched faintly into the casing. Decades later, bunker-busting munitions used in Korea, then Vietnam, traced their roots to Normandy. Engineers refined them, digitized the detonators, packed them into missiles and aircraft payloads. The science advanced. The idea never changed. Direct contact, shaped force, irregular firepower to break fortified lines. In 1981, during Operation Opera, Israeli aircraft used modern guided munitions to punch through the heavily reinforced Osirak nuclear reactor. The weapon's inner cone used a refined copper jet to slice steel in milliseconds. Historians later traced its design back to post-World War II French prototypes, built with documents smuggled from Normandy in the summer of 1944. Sanford never claimed ownership. He worked in silence, teaching agricultural engineering in Pennsylvania. He married once. No children, no military decorations on the walls, just faded photographs of men in wet uniforms, half smiling behind bunkers that no longer existed. In 1993, a team of students visiting Fort Leonard Wood found an unlabeled plaque beside the demolition range. It read only, "To the man who breached the wall." His name was never engraved, but everyone knew. Among modern breachers, there's still a phrase whispered before a blast: Sanford it. It means, do it clean, no waste, no second try. In museums, no hell tube exists. The few that remained were destroyed by ordnance crews fearing accidents. But traces survive in fragments pulled from hedgerows, warped steel tucked into display cabinets with no tag, just blackened metal, scorched at the tips, once hot enough to melt war machines. Those 74 bunkers never stood again. The silence afterward, that was Sanford's legacy. Not glory, not applause, just the fact that men went home who would have died screaming against walls no one could breach. He broke the rules, and he saved the line.